Talofa, Oa'uo Kaleieha Tuitupou, o te nofo I Salt Lake City I Utah, e lelei la'u fa'a Samoa, se I tulou, a e ua o Taumawhai lava. Thank you for tuning in to my presentation for the Undergraduate Research Symposium, in alignment with the UROP Fellowship and the Mellon Pasifika Fellowship. My name is Kaleieha Tuitupou. I am a senior undergraduate student here at the University of Utah studying sociology. My mentor is Dr. Keheulani Vaughn, a professor in education, culture, and society here at the U, as well as the Utah Pacific Island Studies Initiative. My research is on Pacific Islanders and Black Lives Matter, understanding the concept of solidarity in the diaspora. I'm recording from the traditional and ancestral lands of the Shoshone, Paiute, Goshute, and Ute tribes. I want to reaffirm my commitment and respect to indigenous communities and land here in Salt Lake City, where I've done my research and participated in social events, which is core to my research. According to the 2010 US Census, the Pacific Islander population in Utah increased by more than 60% between 2000 and 2010. Pacific Islanders residing in Turtle Island, or North America, bring not only themselves and their families, but connections to Oceania in the past and present sense. They bring with them rich genealogy, cultural values and traditions, and a strong sense of identity in who they are. While Pacific Islanders have an identity at home with their families, because they live in the diaspora, they are also part of a broader community. Diaspora meaning lands outside of their homelands, like the United States. Pacific Islanders are therefore affected by societal issues such as police brutality and racial inequality because they live in a society with white supremacy and systemic racism. This responsibility to stand in and show up and demonstrate to those that experience the violence of white supremacy sparked a call to action for many Pacific Islanders communities during the summer of 2020. This call aligns with cultural and traditional values rooted in relationality, solidarity, and care for the land and people. So this study will focus on the solidarity expressed by Pacific Islanders during the Pasifika First Fridays, Pacific Islanders for Black Lives Matter March and Die-In, held on June 5th, 2020. Pasifika First Fridays are a monthly community-wide art cooperative dedicated to highlighting, celebrating, and supporting Pacifica arts. So they used their platform to create this event that was from 6 a.m. to about 1 p.m. And it was I organized it into 3 sections, which I'm hoping to explore in a larger work or dissertation in the future and in my graduate work. The 2 beginning sections are the literature, so oral and written speeches, and also the die-in. But for my undergraduate research and for this presentation and my paper, I want to focus on the last section or the last part of the event, which is the march from Washington Square up to the Utah State Capitol here in Salt Lake City and vocal expressions that accompanied that march. And one of those vocal expressions was the fa'umu, or a characteristic cry or yell done by Pacific Islander communities, and is also a traditional vocal expression from Samoa. My main goals for understanding in this project are how are Pacific Islanders standing in solidarity with oppressed communities here in the diaspora, and how are we using our cultural knowledge, values, and or expressions in order to support other groups. So as you heard right there, that is the fa'umu. And if you've ever been to a Pacific Islander event, you know that when the fa'umu is done, you know that something is happening, whether that's good or bad. And so in the video, that clip that I just showed or sounded, it was characterized as a war scream. But according to G.B. Milner's Samoan dictionary, the fa'umu is giving a characteristic cry, kind of yell or whoop, uttered when one is violently angry, when challenging someone to fight, when feeling particularly lively or happy as in the course of dancing, or on serving taufolo to a chief or honored guest when it is good manner to let it be heard. The fa'umu is a more modern term that is commonly used today, but it is also, there's also a traditional term and a more historical term in Samoa called the ususu. And I want to focus on this last part of the definition that Councilman Jake Fitzsimonu gave me, that says the ususu is a vocal expression that is intensified with the heightened emotion in a way that it floods the vicinity with your voice. So the fa'umu and the ususu, both the same thing, are ways to express, culture and history and stories. It's a traditional, vocal expression, and with the use of vocal expressions in modern day, I wanted to know how that helped with solidarity. And looking into it, the fa'umu, it has many traditional and historical uses that affect the way that we use it today. So it's been used in celebration, times of war or conflict, communication between visiting matai and hosting village matai, or the announcing of gatherings and or chiefly gatherings. But the expression held a lot of spiritual meaning as it connected to stories of prosperity, plenty, food, water, and hope. So cultural expressions now are not just a physical, yell or shout. It means so much more than that and connects to the identity of Pacific Islanders. And this relates to its modern uses as well in celebration, like weddings and graduations, confrontation or conflict, in sports, music, and dance, and also we see it now in protests. So as we look at the Faumu as it functions in the march and in social movements in general, um, we look at mapping police violence and the background of why this event even happened in the first place. So 1,127 people were killed by police in 2020. And out of that 1,127, 28% were African American. But the African American community only makes up 13% of the US population. So you can see that there's a big disparity there. And also with news articles and social media that we've seen, we know that there is a big target on communities of color and a connection to police violence and police brutality. And during the event, we were remembering names such as George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Elijah McClain, and many more. There was also local people like Bernardo Palacios, Darian Hunt, Bobby Ray Duckworth, and Siale Angilao. And so we as a Pacific Islander community were watching these things, on our televisions with our families. We were witnessing this violence and brutality done to the African American communities as well as our own communities as well. And so we were feeling the hurt and the grief that was happening. And in the background, there was a global pandemic due to COVID-19, as well as economic and political tensions connecting to the upcoming presidential elections. So the Pasifika First Fridays event was in direct response to the violence we were constantly witnessing. And using their platform, they dedicated this Friday in order for us to create a social space to talk about solidarity, unity, and further discuss the next steps for healing. So looking deeper into this event, I wanted to know how we were participating and enriching these relationships. And I found one of those critical ways to be the Faumu. And we were wondering, how could we restore the harmony between us and how could we express that to our brothers and sisters here in the United States? And so I explain a lot more in my research paper about how the Faumu functions in different ways, but one of those ways is as an echoing of emotion. And if you ever visit American Samoa, you'll see fruit bats parading around at night in the trees. And bats, as well as dolphins, have a special way of sensing or locating called echolocation. And echolocation uses sound waves and reflections in order to, target prey, to understand their surroundings, or to locate different things. And so the echo is used as a tool to support these animals in their environments and to help them survive. But used metaphorically, the echo could be used by us as well. The reciprocity of a powerful echo filled with mana or spirit and power can also help us to find our locations or our goals. And so when you hear the faumu, just as you heard in a few slides before, it is an unmistakable sound. And during our march, there were about 100 people there marching with us. And if you can imagine, all of us doing the faumu is a very powerful act of solidarity. And so, according to Dr. Tavita Kaili, as well as Dr. Okusatin Mahina, as mentioned in Dr. Kaili's book, Marking Indigeneity, he talks about the three Tongan concepts of ta, va, and tauhiva. And the faumu functions in all three of these concepts. So Dr. Kaili, in that top left picture, you'll see that he mentions canoe racing. And in the front, there is either someone there or someone drumming to help keep the time, the rhythm, and the pace of the boat, and also to encourage the racers to meet their goals and to get to their destination quickly. And so the faumo for us acted as a way to keep time, rhythm, and beats, and a way to keep pace and encourage us. By, the walk from Washington Square up to the Utah State Capitol is not an easy walk. It's uphill. It was in the middle of June, or in the beginning of June, which is very hot, and it was a hot day. And all of us had a mixture of, young and old, people walking up to the Capitol building. And so in order to keep us, motivated and to keep us remembering, our purpose, we used the faumu as a way to keep that time. We would faumu at every block in order to keep us going and keep us marching and helping us to remember the names that were mentioned before in the speeches and the talks. And so that was how faumu functioned as time. But faumu also functioned as va. And on the bottom left, you'll see a picture of Oceania, or the Pacific Islands. And it reminds me of Epeli Haofa's Our Sea of Islands. And in that article, he talks about how we need to expand our perspectives as Pacific Islanders to who we are. And that we shouldn't refer ourselves to, islands in a far sea, but rather a sea of islands. And so the Fa'uma was a way for us to connect back to Oceania and the Pacific Islands. We live in Utah, which is far from the coast, which is far from our homelands in the South Pacific or in the Pacific itself. And so in order to connect us in the diaspora to our homelands, we were able to use the Fa'umu as a way to connect back to our ancestors and those stories of how they overcame their struggles, and to remember who we are as Pacific Islanders and what we're capable of. And so the Fa'umu was a way to, again, encourage us by creating that relationship between each other, as well as create our relationships back to Oceania and our histories and our culture. And the last part is the Fa'umu as Tauhiwa, or the art of maintaining these spaces, or I would say the art of maintaining beautiful space, or space as in Va, which is relationships and connection. And so the Fa'umu was a way for us to encourage each other. And as we expressed our grief and our pain through the Fa'umu and shouted and released all of those things out into the Salt Lake downtown area, what reflected back to us was encouragement, empowerment, connection, relationship, love, and better strengthening of our connection to each other as, Black and Brown communities, as people of color, as people who are going through these struggles and going through these hardships together. And so again, I explain more in my research paper all of the functions of the Fa'umu and what I've been able to connect to sociological and indigenous theory and knowledge. But in conclusion, for my whole as a paper and for this presentation, is that harmony within self can lead to greater harmony with others. So by knowing who you are and where you come from, the more you'll know where you're going and what to do next. As I said before, Pacific Islanders bring with them cultural values and traditions and identity. So by understanding how we can use that and those strengths, we're able to know how we can help during these situations and during these events, and how we can further participate in activism and help during the social movement. Also, by remembering our indigenous sense of responsibility and knowledge, we're able to manifest it in the forms of activism and expressions of love. So our cultural values and traditions push us toward community work and push us toward activism and expressing that love by action um, and words. And so, by understanding that concept, activism and research are on the front lines for social change. So, we need to understand that, community engaged research is very important, especially to communities of color, but to Pacific Islanders. And by being on the front lines of that activism and social change, and by experiencing those things on the ground level, we're able to inform our research, which is then able to inform how we can better work together as communities. So it's a cycle. And we can't just divide those two things. Activism and research fuel each other. And for Pacific Islanders and indigenous communities, like we understand that, and communities of color, we understand that activism and research and community work all work together to fuel social change. And so I feel like our perspectives have been ignored for way too long, and we need to really understand these diverse perspectives to create a better community. In sociology, I learn about social movements and I learn about human behavior and why we do the things we do and how we can be better human beings, in general. And one way to do that is to acknowledge these perspectives and to understand them and to really consider them in academia in general. And so this project is really to open the doors to help us understand interethnic relations, transindigeneity, and also to help us to be better human beings and to understand how we can help one another, especially during these crazy times. And I want to leave you all with a Samoan proverb that says, "So lefau malefau," in working together, we can accomplish great things. Just I want to acknowledge my mentor, Dr. Vaughn, for her constant and continual support, and also all those who helped me in this project. I'm so grateful for you all. And I recognize, the help of the Office of Undergraduate Research and the Utah Pacific Island Studies Initiative. I'm grateful to them and for my ancestors for opening the door to education, for continuing to test my knowledge and pushing me to excel in my educational journey. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Again, if you would like to contact me, I have my information in the bottom right-hand corner right there. But please, if you have any more questions or any concerns or anything you'd like to talk to me about, I'm so willing to share what I found in my research and also my hopes for future research and future discovery. I know that this project is not perfect and I'm hoping to look into it much more later on. But thank you again for tuning in and listening, and Fafatai Lava.